The patron saint of Ireland traditionally gets his due in famously Irish cities like Boston and Chicago and even outliers like Savannah. But the first city to celebrate St. Patrick in the U.S. was none other than our own St. Augustine. I'm joined now by Jessica Clark, who knows all things St.
Oh,
Augustine.
goodness sakes. I don't know about that.
First Coast News anchor and reporter. Thanks for being here, Jess.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. And I believe we're getting Susan Parker on the line in just a minute. Good morning. Dr. Parker, are you there?
Yes, but you're very garbled.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. We'll try to speak.
Am I?
No, you sound terrific. You sound great.
Okay, well.
Dr. Parker is an author, an editor, a historian, has been writing about St. Augustine history since the mid-90s. But Jessica, let's start with just this fact. I mean,
Sure.
A lot of people have a hard time accepting it's not Boston.
I know.
It's not New York.
I know.
Tell us about this discovery.
Okay, so it goes back to 1600. And let's start with the person who discovered this in documents, and that is Dr. Michael Francis of USF, historian, author. He studies old Spanish documents, and he was going through them in 2017 for another project that he's working on. And in there, he sees a notation for the expenditure of gunpowder in 1600 in St. Augustine. And along the lines of that notation is for San Patricio, St. Patrick. But he says that it didn't come to him immediately. It took a little bit, and then he realized, and then we was really surprised. Well, for the gunpowder was possibly for like an artillery firing, so a cannon, a gun of some sort to be fired on someday in March in 1600. Well, that is long before any celebrations in Boston, in New York, and things like that. The next year, not only was there a notation about a celebration for San Patricio, but there was a procession, a.k.a. a parade.
Yeah,
and that was in 1601.
I love this story, Dr. Parker, of Dr. Michael Francis. He's combing through documents. He's at Spain's General Archive of the Indies, which sounds to me like a very daunting exercise for any historian. Thousands and thousands of these kind of bundles of information, documents, very, very old documents. And so he's going through this and comes upon this discovery. I think, not to sound insulting, but it sort of speaks to the boring but important work of historians, that you can be going through something as seemingly, innocuous as like records of artillery purchases and find something like this.
I think I understood your question because, like I said, it's very hard to hear you. So I will answer the question I think you asked me. And that was about doing research in Spanish documents. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. The Archives of the Indies in Seville is a gigantic building that has documents from throughout the Indies, in other words, from throughout the New World and the Philippines. And, they range over many centuries. There is a huge collection of them also that have been digitized and or microfilmed, many of them in Florida and in St. Augustine. So we use them a great deal. And I think it's interesting because this is one of the cases where you're looking through documents for something and you come across something that you don't expect to. And it's a little gem there. And usually you wish they would tell you a lot more than they do. Because as I understand, and I have not looked at the document that he did, although I've gone blind reading many old Spanish documents. Is that because St. Augustine was supported largely by the Spanish crown, in other words, basically the government funds, they reported their expenditures, and one of them was gunpowder. And so the governor had to account for how much gunpowder he used. And we see throughout the documents this use of gunpowder during religious processions and religious festivals, and also national festivals. And so what would typically happen, because you mentioned the observation of San Patricio or St. Patrick, and then the procession is typically, and this would not come in the list, the accounting of gunpowder, typically you might have a procession around the plaza up to the church with perhaps a statue of St. Patrick if they had one, some perhaps some banners embroidered with St. Patrick's coat of arms, we might call it. I don't know that they would have had one at this time because because if this is the first, it's sort of like you're just starting out with it all.
That's
They
right.
would go to church, and then they would have mass, and then they might have another parade, which was much more parade-like, and perhaps even dancing in the street, music, sometimes throwing of fragrant herbs to make the street smell better.
Jessica, I love how Dr. Francis wrote about this discovery. He said, quote, "If there is a universal truth regarding archival work, it is this. One always finds something intriguing on the last research day, something that compels you to return." And literally, this was the end of December 2017. He was on his last day when he came across this revolutionary discovery for
Isn't that fantastic? And it almost makes you wish, oh, I guess I want to do more. And that always seems to be the case where you put in so much time and you think, oh gosh, am I going to get a gem? And here it pops up at the very end. And Susan, correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that there was this celebration for an Irish saint, St. Patrick, because most likely of the influence of an Irish priest who was in St. Augustine at the time, and that was Padre Riccardo Artur, or Patrick Artur. And so, because he was there during that time, that's the belief that really he influenced the celebration of St. Patrick, patron saint of Ireland. But then those festivities kind of fade out, and they're not carried on for years and years and years. At least there's no documentation of it.
And those continual celebrations, that really is what some of those other cities can lay claim to. You know, Boston began its celebration and has continued since 1737. New York started theirs in 1762, and it has continued. Susan Parker, why didn't it continue in St. Augustine?
Well, we can always, that's probably because Father Arturo left. He leaves St. Augustine 2 years after the 2 or 3 years after the St. Patrick's Day celebrations, and he may have been the main force behind it. All these celebrations, except for the most important feast days or holy days of the Catholic Church, come into popularity and then they fade away. I did a research myself in a document written 85 years later that actually lists the celebrations that take place in St. Augustine and how much it costs the crown in wax for candles, but also for firing the artillery.
Wow.
And St. Patrick's is not included.
Okay.
The San Marcos is, of course, because of the Castillo. There are Corpus Christi, which, of course, is a religious holiday. St. Augustine Day, not surprising. But that one is not included. But throughout the Spanish Empire, these and probably other places, these feast days come and go. And interestingly enough, at one point, the King of Spain, I don't remember which one, ordered that there were too many feast days and people were taking too many days off, basically.
Oh, employment,
So
has not changed all that much in 400 years.
He eliminated a number of them. And in this report that I was mentioning from 1685, it's like, remember, we no longer celebrate St. Michael's Day with a procession, nor St. Andrew's Day, although we used to.
Interesting. Jessica.
So that's what I think. That's my guess as to what happened is that it's that the St. Patrick's Day main supporter left and they didn't continue it.
They lost their advocate. Jessica, you have reported on another holiday that St. Augustine also fairly recently laid claim to, which was Thanksgiving. Other places aren't really keen on giving up their title. Has there been any controversy with St. Augustine laying claim to being the first for St. Patrick's Day?
You know what? I don't know. I think it's just not very well known still, that St. Augustine had this first celebration in 1600 and then 1601. But what I have read when it comes to this, and New York or Boston are chiming in on this, and that is, well, we've been celebrating longer.
Hmm.
And so their dates, what is it? It goes back into 1737 for Boston and New York, 1762.
Right.
So that's
They've
true.
got staying power.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh-huh. Um, Dr. Parker,
Yes, if something disappears,
go ahead.
yeah. I was going to say, if something, if it ends, it's sort of like, well, you haven't celebrated this in, several hundred years.
Right.
So why does that, we're going to lay claim to ours.
So when did the rekindled parade start in St. Augustine?
That started in 2011. Well, the one that we do now. Do you know of something else, Susan?
No,
Okay.
I don't. But I wanted to mention actually that since we're having the Celtic parade this weekend, and that obviously includes the St. Patrick's Day celebration, that one of the reasons that there's this Irish and St. Patrick's Day celebration is because many of the priests at that time in Ireland were being educated in Spain. They did not go to university in Ireland. They came to Spain to go for their priest training. And so there was a lot of connection there. And there's a heavy connection between the Celts throughout that whole area of Europe. There is Celtic presence in northwestern Spain. There's an archaeological dig with 100 stone houses that are identified as being of Celtic origin from around 600 to 200 BCE. So there's definitely a connection, a prehistoric connection between Ireland and Spain.
And what is the heritage of people from that region in St. Augustine in terms of how many people remain in this area that are descendants of, either Celtic or Irish folk?
Well, most of them have moved in later because let's remember the Spanish that came and settled St. Augustine in 1565. All of them left except for a handful 200 years later when Great Britain took over Florida. So they departed. Some of them came back. A lot of these celebrations do not seem to show up again when the Spanish are here for the second time when they arrive in the 1780s. And that's probably as much just a change in the general world they're in, not just anything just for Florida.
Uh-huh. I want to talk about this.
But there are a lot of Irish. But there are a lot of Irish that come in because there is an Irish regiment that is sent into Spanish East Florida from Havana. It's called the Hibernian Regiment, which, as you may know, Hibernia is the old name for Ireland. And so there was a big Hibernian regiment here. There were also there was an Irish regiment in Spanish Louisiana as well. And what is really, I think, jarring to our ears is that the members of these regiments that are serving in Spanish areas, their first names are given a Spanish style, but they retain their old style. So there's Juan O'Donovan and Alejandro O'Reilly and Enrique O'Neill.
I love that. And, I was just reading that there was Don Juan McQueen, there's a book named Don Juan McQueen, that he was Irish, but, he then he had friends with George Washington and a Revolutionary War hero, but he was going to go to debtor's prison. So he hopped the Georgia line, came into Florida, and ended up serving the Spanish king in the second Spanish period. And so he was known as Don Juan McQueen. Eugenia Price, the author, has written a book, and it's named Don Juan McQueen.
Right.
He was a character.
Wow. I wanted to ask.
Well, and we all know of Hibernia in Clay County, which was the plantation of Irishman George, or as he was known at the time, Jorge Fleming.
And Fleming Island. Yeah.
Fleming Island, yes.
The facility, the place that Dr. Francis was doing his research, is full of these bundles. I think there's 43,000 of them or something, and each one, is thousands of pages long. Susan, is there a sense that there is still much to explore and to discover about St. Augustine's history in Spanish Florida in those archives?
I'm sure there is. And the other thing is, we keep asking different questions, even of the same documents we've looked before.
Hmm.
So that, so not only is there new documents that perhaps haven't been really scrutinized, but also we come and ask different questions.
Give an example of what
than
you're
we may
talking
have
about.
asked 50 years ago.
Give an example of that.
Well, for example, probably 75 years ago, no one would have paid any attention to a list of how much gunpowder was being used. Or if they did, it would have been solely for military focus. What was the Army like? What was the Spanish military like? Today, we tend to ask more questions about ordinary people and how they organize their lives and how the larger, international rivalries affected them. So we all go back to, or most of us do, we go back sometimes to the older documents and say, I never saw it that way before, even though I've read the thing entirely through, because we change as we start to ask the questions as well. Some of the documents are highly legible and others are highly illegible. Well, there's many reasons for that. Obviously, not only are they old, but there are some, these were transported from the Western Hemisphere to Spain in ships.
Yeah.
So they got wet, or at least I'm not saying they got soggy, but they, suffered with moisture and things such as that. And it takes a long time very often to go through these documents because to turn them is you can get very tense doing it because you don't want to tear them.
You mean each page
you don't want
by
to tear
page?
The pages.
Right, yeah.
That's
yes. There's no picking up the book, and kind of fanning through it till you get to page 227. And the corners, of course, are where the most damage is. So you really want, and there are scoops for this. You get under the page and then turn it so that you turn the entire page, not just turn it from one of the corners.
It's interesting that you say, that history, the questions that we're asking, are different now. And it is a reminder that history really is a conversation, Jessica. It's not necessarily something that is set in stone, even though we sort of think it is.
Right. So let me fast forward then to modern times with the Celtic festival that takes place in St. Augustine and the St. Patrick's Parade, because I think that has enlivened the interest of Irish and Celtic culture in St. Augustine and what happened in colonial times that still is connected to this Irish culture. And I don't know if many people had even thought about it much in our area in St. Augustine and St. Johns County until, we have every year people putting on their kilts and having a good time at Francis Field in St. Augustine. So this transfer of interest over the years is really interesting to see and why it happens. So
that's a good segue, Jess, because we actually have Albert Silas on the line. He's the organizer of the St. Patrick's Day Festival in St. Augustine. Hey, Albert, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, Jessica, you're going to be the parade announcer this year.
Yes.
And I'm interested, you and Albert both, tell us a little bit about what this festival is like, what people can expect if they've not been.
Albert, you want to start?
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, we have we celebrate our Celtic roots with a big party. It's a family event. Make sure you wear your green. The audience is almost as much fun as the people on the stage or in the parade. And we will all celebrate together. Everybody's Irish on St. Patrick's Day. Remember that. We have 10 of the top Celtic bands in the world. We have Highland Games with over 100 competing athletes. We have 60 artisans and vendors where you can do some wonderful shopping, authentic Celtic wear. And we have actually won awards for our food as the best food festival in the Jacksonville region. We have 2 stages, and with lots of entertainment and lectures, and we have a whiskey tasting on Friday night. It's probably going to get sold out. I think we have about a dozen tickets left. So I'm not going to push that too much. But let me talk about the bands. We have Albanoch from Scotland, everybody's favorite. The legendary Dublin City Ramblers from Ireland, Ireland's #1 folk group for many years in a row. Grammy-nominated Gaelica Celtic Thunder's lead singer, Emmett Kyle, from Philadelphia, Jameson's. Irish Latin rock band, La Unica, they are Celtic, that they have a nice little Latin beat to them. And then Canada's Celtic Rock Warriors, the Mudmen. Really
The
big deal.
Mudmen. Jess,
And then Seven Nations,
hang on a second, Albert. Jess,
which has
Jess
been
is
on
trying to
PBS
interject.
and CNN.
Well, and I was going to say, Albert is right. The music is amazing, and you can sit there, and it is such a cultural experience. I mean, just to watch Albanach with the amazing drums and the attitude on stage, and people even some of the performers come into the audience and play some of the instruments, and it's just, I mean, it is electric feeling, even at noon on a Saturday.
This is a full-on parade, though, with like floats and the whole deal. Like,
So yes, so Albert was talking about the festival that actually takes place on Francis Field. So that's the events field in downtown St. Augustine.
that's right by the parking garage for people who
Right,
don't
exactly.
know. Yeah.
And right before that, and it's happening this weekend, Saturday morning is the St. Patrick's Parade. It's not on St. Patrick's Day, but it is this Saturday morning starting at 10 o'clock. And it is a full-on, getting bigger and bigger parade that had started in 2011, took the years off in 2020 and 2021 for something, and then came back in full force. So I think that would make it the 12th year. And just like Albert was saying, there are some amazing bands. We've got bands coming in, pipe and fife, and different groups coming in from now all over the country.
Oh,
They've
you were
heard
saying.
about the interesting little St. Augustine, St. Patrick parade that's getting bigger and bigger and more acknowledged. We've got a band coming in from Boston, from Oregon, and even from Spain this year, which is pretty darn cool. And they'll be having performances on Friday downtown. If you head downtown anywhere in the afternoon on Friday, you'll be able to see them performing by the marina and also in the plaza.
Well, a lot to look forward to this weekend. Jessica Clark, Dr. Susan Parker, Albert Silas, thank you all for being here to talk about the Irish history of St. Augustine.
So much fun. Thank you.